Good afternoon, and welcome to everyone in this room and watching on the live stream and YouTube. My name is Saurabh Gupta. I'm product manager of Google Apps Script.
I'm Jonathan Rascher. I'm a software engineer on Google Apps Script.
And today, we are going to show you how you can extend Google Docs with Apps Script. So with a show of hands, how many of you have heard of Google Docs or used Google Docs? Almost all of you. I figured that much. But for those of you who haven't, or those of you who are watching on the live stream, Google Docs is a word processing app in Google Drive. Using Google Docs, you can create and share documents across devices, in your browser, on your iPhone, or Android phone. And yes, it works even when you are not connected. It's really awesome. But you know what is even more awesome? Starting this week, you can use Apps Script in Google Docs. That's awesome. Thank you. And for those of you who do not know what Apps Script is, well, Apps Script is the JavaScript engine in the cloud, and it lets you integrate and automate and make the most out of Google Apps. So you might ask, well, that's all great and good, and yeah, you can use Apps Script in Google Docs, but what does that really mean? So just to elaborate on that, let me share a simple story. And this happened a few months ago, and Jonathan will remember this. Jonathan and I were hanging out with our friend, Bob, in a bistro a few months ago. And Bob was talking about awesome research that he's doing and this great research paper that he's writing. And we were pretty excited because we know Bob is a Google Docs user. So we were super excited about that. And he was going on and on about his research. But he had a slight problem. He said, well, he is referring to a ton of sources, books, journals, articles, you name it, and he's having a hard time keeping up. And what's even more worrying for him was that he wanted to make sure that he's citing all these sources. He's giving credit where credit is due. So this was a genuine problem for him. So you know what happened next? Well, something that usually happens when you put a user, an engineer, and a product manager on the table. A napkin comes out, and people start scribbling stuff. And that's what we exactly did. And we drew something and said, hey, Bob, you need a bibliography management app in Google Docs. And Bob said, yeah, I want to be able to add sources to it, all of those sources that you just saw. Not just that, I want to be able to cite those sources in my research paper. And at the end of it, I want to have a well-formatted, good-looking bibliography in my research paper. So he said, yes, exactly. This is a great use case. And right after the dinner, Jonathan and I went back to our office and said, hey, we got to build our friend Bob this app. And that's what we exactly did. And you know what we built? We built an app called Beepstro using Google Apps Script. And then you will ask, why Beepstro? Well, it's obvious. In the moment of sobriety, we were sitting in a Beepstro, and we talked about bibliography, so why not Beepstro, right? But the important thing here is that this app is built using Google Apps Script. And what we are going to show you here in next 2 minutes, a demo of Beepstro. And the point of the demo is that you can build your own app. And we hope to give you some insights into how you can build your own app in Google Docs. So let's get to the demo. This is Google Docs, and this is Bob's research paper. And as you can see, on the menu, left of help, is a menu item called Beepstro. So the first thing that Bob needs to do is configure this app. And he clicks on Beepstro, and he clicks on Settings, and you can see there's a submenu, and clicks on Configure. And up comes a form, and he chooses a citation format, and he configures the app. That's pretty straightforward, right? The next thing, if you remember from the napkin that I was talking about, was he needs to add sources, all of those list of papers and journals and all of those articles. So he clicks on Beepstro, clicks on Add Source, and up comes another form. And you can see how well formatted and good-looking UI it is. And he starts adding all of these sources in this app. And he collects a list of sources, and a bibliography gets generated for it. So he adds the source, and the next thing he does is he scrolls all the way to the bottom of the document and sees that, hey, here's this bibliography, well formatted according to the standard that he chose, and it's right there. So that's awesome, that's cool. So he gets a bibliography, he is able to add sources. The next thing he wants to do is be able to cite the source, right? So he scrolls up in his document, locates the cursor wherever he wants to cite the source, then clicks on the menu item, beeps row, and clicks on Add Inline Citation, right? And now he can choose from any of the source and cite that source right in the document, right? So this is awesome, and you can see the source is now cited. So we met all of Bob's requirements and built this app using Google Apps Script. But Bob is our friend, right? And we wanted to throw in a little bit of extra. So the extra that we wanted to throw in was, hey, what if Bob wants to see where a particular source is cited in the doc? So we built a capability called Manage Sources. So Bob clicks on, again, beeps row, and says, OK, I want to manage a source. And up comes on the right side, a panel which shows the list of all of Bob's sources, right? And here, Bob can just say, OK, I want to highlight a particular source, and you can see a source is highlighted, and he can remove the source if he wants, and do all of these kinds of interesting things. But the one last thing that is pretty interesting is that he can scroll all the way to the bottom of his bibliography and say just plays around with it. Say he corrupts it or something. Then he can just click on refresh, and a bibliography gets refreshed. So that's a very simple demo of a type of app you can build in Google Docs using AppScript, right? And we want to make sure that, yes, your app is also as awesome as this one and using Google Apps Script. So let's get started. How do you build an app like that? Or rather, how did we build Beepstro? So there are 4 steps in building Beepstro. The first step is that you want to be able to create scripts using the script editor in Google Docs. So this is Google Docs. You can see the Tools menu is expanded. And in the Tools menu, you will see 2 new menu options, the Script Editor and the Script Manager. Using the Script Editor, you can create container-bound scripts to Google Docs. And you can learn a lot about container-bound scripts on our developer documentation. But the crux of it is that these scripts live and die with the document. So this is the starting point. You want to be able to create scripts in document, right? What's next? The second thing is you want to identify how you want to plug your app into the UI of Google Docs. So again, this is Google Docs. And anything that you want to do with Google Docs always starts with this class called Document App. If there is one thing that I want you to take away from this session, it's this, that Document App is your starting point in building apps for Google Docs, right? So this is Google Docs, and what you see highlighted is the menu or the UI, and it's very simple. If you want to get a handle to the UI of Google Docs, just call document-app.getUI. It's that simple. And then I'm going to show you some amazing things that you can do with the UI. So first up is inserting a menu. And it's pretty simple. As you can see on the code on the left, on the right, document-app.getUI.createMenu, and you can create a top-level menu, then add items to it, and you can even add submenus and so on, right? But the idea is that document-app.getUI gives you a handle to the different UI aspects of Google Docs. So adding a menu is great. What's next? Showing your app in a sidebar. Now, if your app shows up in sidebar, that's great, because what users get with this is the opportunity to use your app while they are working with the document. So it does not interrupt the flow of the user. So this is a natural place where your app shows and is very useful, right? And again, using document-app.getUI.showSidebar. You can also surface your app in a dialog. That interrupts the flow of the user, but it's perfect for forms and other things. Again, using document-app.getUI.showDialog. It's quite similar to what you saw yesterday in the forms session, where this was pretty similar, where forms app, get UI, and show dialog and all of that. So there's a consistent theme around it as to how you get to the UI of docs. This example here is a little bit involved, but it shows you how you can serve your app in a dialog. So say, for instance, if you had a config dialog.html or an HTML file in your script project, and that's the app that you wanted to show in a dialog, then you can very easily, using HTML service of AppScript, create an HTML output object and just plug that in and show dialog, and that's it. So you create an HTML file, create an HTML output object using HTML service, and just pass that and show dialog, and your app is up and available. So we talked about 4 steps, and we talked just 2 steps. You can create scripts using the script editor. You can extend the UI of Google Docs, plug into the UI. The third thing you want to do is you want to wire your app into the Google Docs UI. So the idea is your app should fire up somehow, right? Or another way of asking this is, what is the main equivalent, main function, as you have in Java or C? What is the main here, right? So let's look at how your app gets loaded up. So when a user opens a document, AppScript looks in your code and looks for a function called onOpen. So onOpen is sort of that equivalent of main, right? And once AppScript finds onOpen, it executes onOpen. So a typical use of onOpen is to insert menus, because you want to be able to extend the UI once the user opens the document. And then by clicking on menu items, you want the user to start using the app. So this is a natural flow. A document is opened, onOpen is called, onOpen inserts menu items, and then user can click on menu item, and a corresponding function will be invoked. So that's simple, straightforward. So we covered 3 steps: create scripts using the script editor, extending the UI of Google Docs, responding to events. Jonathan now is going to cover how you can work with the document and modify the document stuff. Jonathan?
Yes, thank you, Saurabh. So Saurabh began the talk with our friend Bob, and he was a Google Docs user, like Saurabh and I think almost all of you, it seemed like. And he had this problem with Google Docs. He wanted an ability to manage bibliographies in Docs. And so we built him an app for that called Bibstro, using this new AppScript integration. And so Saurabh just covered the first 3 steps we used for this. So we created some scripts, we extended the Google Docs UI with custom UI elements, and we can respond to events from those UI elements for things like menu clicks or button clicks, for example. So that brings us to the 4th point. And this point is completely specific to Document App. Because if any of you saw, for example, the talk some of our colleagues gave yesterday about the integration with Google AppScript and Google Forms, you'll see that these first 3 steps are very similar in Forms as in Docs or in spreadsheets. But this 4th step is specific to Google Docs. So what we need to learn is, how is the document exposed to AppScript? So when we want to do something in Bibstro, like maintain this live updating bibliography at the end of the document, how do we actually insert, read, write, modify the text in the document? And there's a couple of different ways that we can work with the Google Docs document from AppScript, which I'm calling document models. And the first of those is as a tree of elements. So if you've ever done work with, say, HTML or XML, the document object model, or the DOM, then this should be somewhat familiar to you. It's a tree-structured document, much like a web page. Let's take a look at what this looks like. So on the left, you can see we have a document. And this one's pretty simple. It's got a couple of paragraphs, there's a bulleted list, there's a table, and then at the bottom of the page, there's a footer, just a page footer. So this is all exposed to AppScript as document, the document class. And we get this in AppScript code by saying document app.getActiveDocument. And we'll see some code samples for this in just a minute. So this is sort of the equivalent of the root element of, say, a web page, the HTML element. And like the HTML element in a web page, it's subdivided up into sections. So we can see we have a body section at the top that's highlighted, and then there's a little break, and then down at the bottom we have the footer section. A page could also have, for example, a header section, or it could have a footnote section for numbered footnotes. And these are all optional, but any page is going to have a body, a document body. And if we take a look now inside the body, you can see that it contains elements, again, like in a web page, contains elements for things like paragraphs, list items, tables, and so forth. These are kind of the equivalent of block-level elements, and they, in turn, are further subdivided up into other elements, into inline elements. For example, if we take a look at this first paragraph here, the first paragraph, it just has some text in it, but in the middle of that run of text, the text is interrupted by an image. So how is this exposed to AppScript? Well, so if you take a look now, you can see that this paragraph element has 3 child elements. So there's a text element, and that represents the run of text up to but not including the image. And then in the middle, there's an inline image element, and that lets AppScript access properties of the image like the binary contents of the image or the MIME type, so whether it's a PNG or a JPEG or a GIF or what have you. And then after that, there's another text element. And this next text element just contains all of the text in the paragraph from the inline image up until the end of the paragraph. And so you can see, again, if you've ever done work with HTML, it should be very similar to what you've done with web pages. Some of the element names are a little bit different, but the basic idea is the same. And in AppScript, when we work with the document that the user sees on screen, what we're actually doing when we use this tree-based document model is saying, okay, we're going to take a look at the document tree, and we're going to take a look just at specific elements or specific nodes in the document tree, and do things like insert elements or delete them, change style properties, and so forth. But this has all been kind of an abstract overview. So now let's see a concrete example. So recall from Bibstro, we had this functionality where Bibstro maintained, again, the bibliography at the end of the document. And you saw that the first thing Saurabh did in his demo, he configured Bibstro to pick a citation format. So he picked MLA format. But let's say you have a paper and you want to change it for another journal, for example. You want to change it to a new citation format. So you go into configure, you change from MLA format to APA format, for example. So what we want Bibstro to do, and what it in fact does, is at that point updates the bibliography, replaces the existing sources, the existing formatted references, with new references in the new citation format that you've selected. So now let's take a look at how we actually do that in Bibstro. Step 1 is we need to find the bibliography in the document. We need to find the elements in this document tree that represent the contents of the bibliography that the user sees in their document view. And you can see at the top, I've put this little blue rectangle. Yeah, it looks blue. Okay, it's a little blue rectangle at the top around this element that says works cited. So that's what we're going to call the title paragraph at the top of the bibliography. And it's part of the MLA citation format. It's an indicator to somebody reading an article or an essay or what have you that, okay, the paper is done now. This is where the bibliography starts. But it can also be an indicator to AppScript programmatically of that exact same thing, that this is where in the document tree the bibliography begins. So step 1, there's going to be 3 steps total. Step 1 here is to find that paragraph. So here we have some code to do just that. So we start out with document app, get active document. And we say get body, to get that body section, the main contents of the document between any headers or any footers. And then we just do this while loop, and we use the find element call on the document body. And so what the find element call does is it takes 2 parameters. It takes the type of element we want to find, and in this case we say that's just a paragraph. So what we're saying actually here is loop over all the paragraphs in the document body. And then it also takes this search result object. And at each iteration of the loop, the search result object is going to be populated with the element that we're looking at right now. And so we take that element, that paragraph that we're looking at, and we get its text using edit as text. And we compare that to this known string, which is works cited. And when we find this paragraph whose text is equal to works cited, we know that we've completed step 1 here. We found the title paragraph, and hence we found the rest of the bibliography in the document. Which brings us to this point. And so because the user wanted to change their citation format, what we're going to do, the easiest way to do this, is just completely wipe out the contents of the bibliography, and then just reinsert new bibliography entry paragraphs using the new citation format. So let's take a look at how we do this. We start out with the title paragraph that we had previously, and now we do another while loop, but this time we're not finding elements. We're looking at the next sibling element. Again, if you've worked with the document tree in HTML with jQuery, for example, this should be somewhat familiar. And if not, basically a sibling element is just the element in the document that comes immediately after the bibliography title. So we do this, and now we want to remove that paragraph, that first bibliography entry after the title from the document. So how do we do this? It's a two-step process. So we take the title paragraph, we get the paragraph after it, and we take this bibliography entry paragraph and we call clear. What clear does is it says take the contents of this paragraph, any text or any other elements inside of it, and just wipe them out of the document. So at this point, we have the title paragraph followed by an empty paragraph where the first bibliography entry used to be. But we don't even want an empty paragraph. We don't want to have any paragraph at all left. So what we do is we call merge. Merge is kind of an interesting operation, I think. It doesn't really map up cleanly to the HTML document object model or to an XML document operation. What merge is going to do is it's going to say, take the second paragraph, this bibliography entry paragraph, and now it's empty because we just cleared it, and collapse this empty paragraph into the paragraph before it. So now, after we call merge, the end result is we used to have two paragraphs. Now we just have one, and its contents is just the contents of the title paragraph, because we cleared the contents of the old bibliography entry before we called merge. And so then we just do this in a loop. And each iteration of a loop uses this two-step process to remove one of the bibliography entries from the document. And we do this until we've removed all of those bibliography entries after the title paragraph, which brings us to this point. So at this point, we have the works cited paragraph at the top. It's sitting there all by its lonesome self, and it's kind of sad because all of its friends are gone. So now, what we want to do is insert some new paragraphs after it with the same bibliography data from the data store, but with the new citation format. So the text in the document will be different, even though it represents the same sources. And we do this as follows. So this time, instead of removing elements from the document, we want to insert elements into the document tree. So we take the title paragraph. Once again, this is kind of our anchor or our reference point that tells us where in the document tree does this structured bibliography start. And we take that title paragraph and we get its parent element. So in this case, that'll most likely be the document's body element. But it makes the code a little bit more general to speak of it just as a parent. And so we take this parent element and we use it to get the child index of the title paragraph. That is to say, we use it to get a number that represents, okay, which element, how many elements into the parent is this title paragraph? And then we load some source data for the bibliography references. We load that from a data store. And for each source, we have some code somewhere to format that according to the citation format that the user has selected. And so we do that, and we have this formatted text. And now we need to actually put it into the document. And this is really simple. We take the parent element that we found a minute ago, and we just say insert paragraph. And that takes two things. So first of all, it takes a child index, or an insertion point. And to get this, we just use the insertion point that we computed previously by getting the child index of the title paragraph and adding 1 to that. And then this also takes a string, which in this case is just the formatted contents of this new paragraph, of the bibliography entry. So we make this insert paragraph call, and after we do that, we've now inserted a new bibliography entry paragraph after the title paragraph. And then we can do things like set margins, set styles, or whatever we want to do on this new paragraph that we've just inserted. And that's about it. We do this in a loop over and over again for each source. And at the end of this loop, and at the end of this three-step process, we've now removed the old bibliography entries from the document and replaced them with new entries using the new up-to-date citation format. And so that's pretty much how we use the document tree in AppScript to work with the document. It's great. It's a little bit involved, but it's really not that complicated. But it does involve a good bit of code. You can see I had to split this over three slides. So for cases where we don't actually care about the elements of the document, about the tree structure, it seems like it would be nice if we had some way to work with the document just as rich text, ignoring intricacies like different elements. And it turns out that we also can look at the document as this. The second document model is a long string of formatted text, of rich text, ignoring anything like non-text elements, like sections, and so forth. And you recall from Bibstro, we had this functionality where we have this sidebar, which I totally love. We have this sidebar, and the user can pick a source in the bibliography in the sidebar. They can click the highlight button, and then that source, all the citations that reference that source, will be highlighted in the document by setting their background to yellow. So how do we do this? Do we need to worry about element trees and all of this for something like this that's strictly a text-based approach? I saw somebody shake their head, and I love that, because no, we don't. So we have document app, get active document, get body. And that's the same as before. But now the technique we're using here starts to diverge a bit. So now we say edit as text. You might recall we did this a minute ago on a single paragraph to get just the text of a paragraph. But we can also do this on the entire document body, and this is going to give us back a text element that contains just the textual contents of the paragraph, with things like inline images or inline drawings just left out. So they'll still be left in the document. They won't be removed from the document that the user sees, but they're removed from the model of the document or the view of the document that's exposed to AppScript. And then we can use normal string operations in JavaScript. For example, here we have a regular expression in the middle of the slide, and that matches parenthesized substrings in the document, or citations. And you can tell it's a regular expression because it is horrendously ugly and it's just an abomination to look at. But that's just standard JavaScript. And so we do a JavaScript regular expression match in a loop. We loop over all the citations in the string contents of the document body. And for each of those citations, what we do is we say, okay, we have some logic to find out, does it go with the source that we're trying to highlight? And if it does, we want to set the background color for that substring in the document body to yellow. So we use this body text element that we got in the first step. And we say body text element set background color. And that takes just 3 things. It takes the first 2 parameters as indices, so a start index and an end index. And we compute these just using the normal regular expression indices we got from the regex match. Because these indices, they're just character text indices. They ignore things like element, child, positions, and so forth. And then finally, we just pass in a color, so that's the hexadecimal color code for yellow. And that's about it. So this edit as text-based approach, you can see it's very different than the document tree. It is not quite as powerful. The document tree can do anything to the document, whereas this can only perform text and formatting operations. But for text and formatting operations like highlighting citations in an essay, in fact, this lets you do the same thing as you could do with the tree-based approach, but in much less code, and in my opinion, in code that's much easier to read, regular expressions notwithstanding. So that's about it. We have these 2 models of the document. We can work with it either as a tree, like a web page, or as a long string of rich text, with formatting attributes applied to each character in that string. There's one other model of working with the document. This is not launched yet, but it's going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks after I/O. And you saw Saurabh actually hinted at it in his demo. And that is, we're going to give you an API to work with cursor and selection in the document. So when the user positions their cursor in some text or next to an image, or selects a range of text or a table or whatever you might have, we're going to give you the ability to determine where is the cursor or what is the selection, and to operate on the cursor or selection by doing things like inserting text at the cursor. So recall from the Bibstro demo that Saurabh showed, we have this menu and we let the user put their cursor after a sentence or a phrase they want to cite. And the user says insert citation. And we show them a dialog and they pick a source, and then that source appears in the document right after their cursor. So this is working today. We're finalizing the API for launch to give you something that reduces complexity in a bunch of edge cases. There are surprisingly many edge cases in document selection. It's kind of amazing. So there we go. That's about it. We have these 4 steps that we use to build this app called Bibstro, to build a bibliography app in Google Docs. So we created some scripts using the script editor, using the new Google Docs integration that we just launched a couple of days ago. We extended the Google Docs UI to add things like custom menus and dialogues, and my personal favorite, custom sidebars, because who doesn't love a sidebar? And we also have the ability to respond to events, just like in any other event-driven programming framework. And those events can do things, they can do operations on the document on behalf of the user, which is what makes this all work together and lets us build apps that automate Google Docs. Apps like Bibstro, or apps like whatever you all want, to do any use case, document, workflow, whatever you want in Google Docs. I'm excited to see what you all are going to build with this. I kind of hope you give it a better name than Bibstro, because that's just bad. So we have this. That's about it for the talk. We have some links here to our documentation. And also, I know I brushed over the code samples kind of quickly to get in a couple of examples. So we're going to be posting all of the code for this Bibstro sample app online in a couple of weeks after I/O. So keep your eye on, say, the Google Apps developer blog and the AppScript pages on developers.google.com. So I think that's about it. Thank you all for watching. And at this point, if you have any questions, looks like there's a couple of mics in the middle of the room. So come up and talk into the mic. Yep. Thank you.
Hi. Is this available only for docs or available also for the spreadsheets and the PowerPoint and other?
So yeah, so this is, today you can use scripts in spreadsheets, in sites, and yesterday session we announced in forms as well, and now in documents.
Hi.
Yes, please.
The adding of the menus is different on spreadsheets, right? So in spreadsheets you say add menu, and so when are you going to integrate the same functionality, the new UI service to add the sidebars? When are you going to, what's the timeline for that coming on?
So
that is
Yeah,
So-
it will happen pretty soon, and this will converge. Like as you saw in forms and docs, we are creating a concept of document app.get UI, so you can get handled to the UI. You will see something similar in spreadsheets as well.
Right, and this
Soon.
will include the full range of what we talked about today. So things like, for example, the sidebar that you can't show today in spreadsheets.
Yeah.
That sidebar that exists now in Document App and in Form App will be coming to Spreadsheet App in the next couple of weeks.
Just on the new cursor-based location, would we get a right-click menu?
We have not planned for it, but let's talk about it at the office hours.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, please.
I have a question about deployment. So is it something I can create only inside my own document, or is it something I can create once and deploy it to all the users in my domain?
So what you're asking is really how you distribute a script that can be inserted into all of documents across a number of users and stuff. So we are working on that, and do watch out the Google Apps Developers blog for more news on that. It's not there yet, but coming soon.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, please.
Yeah, next.
I wanted to ask about if you're considered cross-document integration. So for example, if I have a spreadsheet, I want to use as data source to fill a doc with citations, for example, or if I want to hit an external data source, such as if I've got a Cloud SQL database running and I want to be able to pull content from that into a report, for example, and drive that into a doc.
So that is an excellent question. And I think the answer is we don't have anything pre-built to do this, but I think we give you all the tools you'd need to do that. For example, we have services called Spreadsheet App and Drive App. So what you could do, I can't think of any reason not to, is you could have a sidebar in Google Docs or a dialog that uses the Drive App service to let the user pick a file from their Google Drive, pick a spreadsheet, and then use the Spreadsheet app to take that spreadsheet, read in data from it, and populate it into the document. So there's nothing prefabricated to do this, but I believe we have all the tools for you to do that today.
Cool. Thank you. Yes, please.
One more question. Are you planning on extending the document permissions to, for example, keep allowance for editing document but not editing the scripts inside a document?
I'm sorry, I did not understand your question. If you
Okay,
can
so when you give somebody a permission currently to edit your document, you automatically give them the permission to edit scripts in the document. Are you planning on having a separate permission to allow editing the document, but not allowing editing the scripts?
So that's an interesting question, and we debated this a lot. When you create scripts that are part of a document, they inherit the sharing model from the document itself. So edit privileges on the document mean edit privileges on the script. However, as a developer, what you can do is you can use libraries and then sort of abstract that out, where you're using a library and not giving edit permissions on the library, just the view, and so you can abstract some of that out. But really what might help you is things that we are working on, which is the distribution model, which is how do you take a script and just let users install it in their documents and stuff.
Yeah, do you want to? Yeah.
Can I control the existing menu of a Google Doc, like download or print, if I want to remove that or disable that? Is that possible?
Not today. You can insert a new top-level menu. You cannot tinker around with the existing native menu options just yet.
Right, and we've thought about things like this, but there's some intricacies involved. For example, Google Docs can change their menu structure as they add features or just as they move menu items around, and you wouldn't want your script to break, for example, if a Google Docs menu item wasn't in the location you expected it to be at. So,
yeah.
It's for disabling downloads. So sometimes you want to share a folder, and you want people to only read documents, and except for PDFs, where you can disable downloads, you can't do that on most document types.
So if I rephrase the question, you want more control over whether a document can be downloaded or not?
Yeah.
I'm sorry? Oh, no. See, you cannot play around with the existing menu options. What you can do is, if you want to build an interesting app, you can add new menu options and let users use all of that. Yeah. Can you please come up to the mic? Yeah.
Is this in your roadmap, like controlling the existing menu item? Because we do get a lot of requests from customers. I can share a document with someone, but I don't want them to print them or download them, just view it.
So, yeah, I mean, you can share documents with view privileges, and that's a limited set of things that you can do on a document, and that's about it. Yeah. Let's just check online if there are more questions. Any questions? Okay. No
That's
questions?
easy to do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.